He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. This week, the media, money and sport on our screens. New Zealand Rugby has announced that revenue was up overall last year thanks to its broadcast revenue topping $100 million for the year. Good news, but it ended up with an overall loss for the third year running, and the boss said the games model is unsustainable. Not good news. Meanwhile, the top competition in netball got underway this weekend, but in a shorter form that brings in less TV money, and no broadcaster has yet committed to screening the RNZ Premiership again next season. So, is it now a buyer's market for broadcasters in TV sport, and should the sports that need TV money to pay professional players be worried? First on Mediawatch this weekend, though, an entire generation has grown up online without any government here really regulating their digital world. Most of the organisations we do have for overseeing content are so old they even predate the internet itself. So why was there a sudden surge of political concern this week about teenagers and social media?
Number 4 on the list of the top 6 other places and things under 16 should be banned from: the mall. I don't like go to the mall. I very rarely go to the mall, but when I go to the mall, they're bloody everywhere.
Oh, crawling, aren't they?
Oh my God!
And
what
how
about
do
when
they
you
get
forget
the money?
Yeah.
How do they get
Where's
the
your
money? I was at the mall the other day, and there were all these kids, and they had like shopping bags from everywhere. And I was like,
It was Fletch, Vaughan and Haley, and mostly Vaughan, on their ZM show last Wednesday, running through a list of things they'd ban for teenagers if they could. And they were kidding, of course, but also making a point. What young people should and shouldn't do has been a bit of a theme in our politics lately, and our media have picked it up and run with it. For example, last week here on Mediawatch, we heard how a call to bring in compulsory national military service for young Kiwis over 18 received some enthusiastic backing.
Off you go. Off you go to compulsory 6 months in military training.
Nick Mills on News Talk ZB in Wellington last week, and one of the reasons that he and others thought our youths needed a bit of boot camp these days was the influence of digital devices.
There's a lot of talk about brain rot and how bad they feel after there's been a whole day on a phone. And there's no doubt that you would feel a lot better after a day's physical activity out in the wop-wops.
Definitely.
Matt Heath and Tyler Adams there, also on News Talk ZB, though there was plenty more where that came from others in the media as well. Now, when the government banned phones in schools last year, that got widespread media approval too, though the effort to cut back on their school lunches, not so much. And last Tuesday morning, without warning, the Prime Minister announced, all of a sudden, he wanted to cut off under 16s from social media. And he did it on social media with these words.
As a dad, I feel very strongly that we need to do more to keep our kids safe from online harm. We have restrictions to keep our children safe in the physical world, but we don't have restrictions in the virtual world. And we should.
Now, if the goal was to get that idea talked about in the media, that certainly worked, especially with Nick Mills on ZB in Wellington, within minutes.
Do you like this new members' bill? I do. I really do. That's why I'm talking to you about it straight off the cuff, right now.
And at the other end of the working day, the ban idea was also discussed at length on RNZ's panel. News Talk ZB's drive time equivalent The Huddle, and ZB's Drive show kicked off with a former Facebook CEO for Australia and New Zealand, Stephen Sheila, who said this.
I think it's a good idea in principle. I think the challenge is going to be doing it in practice, but I do think that evidence shows that younger people, there's harm to them, I think, that they need to be protected from. I think there's a good, strong evidence to show that 16 is a good age for that sort of level.
And the proposed social media ban was also big news on both 6 p.m. TV news bulletins soon after that as well. And the next day, Fletch, Vaughan and Haley kept their ZM listeners in the loop like this.
National have put forward a bill to Parliament where under 16s will be banned from social media. This is basically following Australia's situation.
Mm-hmm.
Which can't be working because my niece who turned 14 yesterday is on social media. She messages me on social media and she lives in Australia.
So she's somehow found a loophole or a VPN?
I don't know.
Yeah.
If anyone can find a loophole, it's a teenager.
I mean, if we're honest about it, we should all be banned from social media.
Oh, pull the plug,
we should pull the plug, to be honest.
Pull the plug.
Now, Hayley Sproul was just kidding there about pulling the plug on social media for all ages. Music radio networks like ZM depend upon social media these days to engage the digital natives thereafter. And while ZM's Vaughan Smith was right there about National following Australia's lead on this, he wasn't quite right about a couple of other things. Australia's ban on social media for under 16s doesn't come into force until the end of this year, so his niece there is doing nothing wrong yet. And more significantly, the just-announced Social Media Age-Appropriate Users Bill isn't before Parliament here either, at least not yet. It's in the members' biscuit tin, along with dozens of other would-be laws drafted by wishfully thinking MPs, and it will only get a go in Parliament if it's picked out in the ballot, which is, almost literally, a lottery. And politically, the odds make it even longer that this bill will ever become law under this government, even though the Prime Minister himself has backed it, like this, on Facebook.
Now, I'm here with National MP Catherine Wedd, who has launched an incredible bill, a members' bill actually, to restrict social media for under 16-year-olds.
That's right, Chris. This bill is about protecting children from online harm, including bullying, addiction and exposure to inappropriate content by restricting social media access for under 16-year-olds. It puts the onus on social media companies to verify that someone is over the age of 16 before they access social media platforms. And it mirrors the approach taken in Australia and follows work in other countries like the UK, the EU and Canada.
And the Prime Minister backing a members' bill like this is unheard of, or at least the former government press secretary turned lobbyist Ben Thomas hadn't heard of it, as he said on the Spin-Offs podcast Gone by Lunchtime this week.
Private members' bills are non-government bills. They're basically for backbenchers, people who aren't members of the executive, the ministry. They only get debated rarely in Parliament, every second Wednesday, but it often gets bumped. So it takes a long time for these things to get through the system. And even to get into the system, they have to be drawn basically in a lottery from a biscuit tin. I think there's currently 70 proposed members' bills in the Office of the Clerk.
And if online safety is a big issue for families now, and for the Prime Minister, well, why was a big hitter in his cabinet not backing this bill? Communications and Media Minister Paul Goldsmith, for example. Paul Goldsmith is currently running with a proposal to update the outdated way that our media are regulated in the digital era, so that would have made sense. The other sensible choice to punch through this bill would be the Minister of Internal Affairs, whose department oversees the digital safety of online services. But in this coalition government, that's Brooke Van Velden, who's also the deputy leader of ACT.
The real problem, it has to involve parents. The solution proposed by National doesn't. The real solution has to be aware of the complexities of the internet. At the moment, it says social media is any kind of internet thing that connects two people. Well, it's practically the whole internet.
Sorry, Australia's managed to do it. Why can't we just copy them?
Well, Australia hasn't managed to do it. Australia's passed a law that hasn't come into effect, and already they've had to carve out YouTube.
And that's an interesting point. Australia's impending social media ban, personally backed by their Prime Minister who's just won an election incidentally, does indeed exclude YouTube. TikTok complained it was like banning fizzy drinks but exempting Coca-Cola. And just last week, when RNZ ran an article all about that, the Minister of Internal Affairs, Brooke Van Velden, was quoted as saying this.
A minimum age for social media is not something the New Zealand government's considering.
Now, this week, the National MP Catherine Wedd said that she'd been working on her bill for over a year, so clearly National and ACT are just not on the same page here. And not on the same page as Labour either on regulating the digital realm. The former government's proposals for a one-stop shop to regulate online and traditional media, called Safer Online Services, was summarily scrapped by Brooke Van Velden a year ago. And she told Mediawatch this at that time.
That we will not be progressing with one regulator for all online material and platforms, which was to try and regulate harmful information so broad and so subjective that it started to lend itself towards hate speech laws, which this government does not wish to progress.
But it turns out it's not just the ACT Party that's not on board with National's new bill. Soon after it was unveiled on Tuesday, former District Court Judge David Harvey, who's an expert on internet law, said he could see the main problem, that it puts the onus on social media companies to verify that someone is over the age of 16.
Currently, there are no legally enforceable age verification measures for social media platforms in New Zealand.
And on Morning Report on Wednesday, David Harvey said another wrinkle was Section 14 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act.
Under 16-year-olds would be denied they use social media to express themselves and receive information, and that would potentially be restricted.
That's exactly right. They would be basically offline as far as that means of communication is concerned. Remembering, of course, that the internet is primarily a system for communication. So any attempt to regulate the internet has implications for freedom of expression.
And at that same time, over on News Talk ZB on Wednesday, Mike Hosking was giving a rough ride to MP Catherine Wedd.
But at the moment, parents, they are really, really struggling and grappling
Look, Catherine,
with
I get
how
that.
do we,
I'm a parent. I get
this?
it.
I know.
You're selling me the emotion. Don't
saying,
sell me the emotion. Sell me the technical answer. And sadly, you don't have one.
No, well, I think that we do, because this bill, it says to those social media companies that you must take reasonable steps.
And what if they say we can't?
What
do we say? Technically, we simply don't know how to do it.
And while Wedd had boldly called her bill a result for concerned parents, once she was off the air, Mike Hosking reckoned her efforts would have no such result at all.
Catherine Wedd, God bless her. I mean, she doesn't have the technical nous, clearly, to understand that technically you can't do what she wants to do. Do we wish there was the Yes, but there isn't. So don't start waxing and waning about what we should really do as parents. You're not solving any problems.
And on Substack, David Harvey also said that if the problem is bullying and inappropriate content, well, we already have a law for that, the Harmful Digital Communications Act, overseen the last time National was in power by the then Justice Minister Judith Collins. And David Harvey made another point on Morning Report. Many children and young people already live their lives online via social media, and if they're already under 16, they would now be forced to stop if this bill became law before starting up again.
They are communicating. And that is the way they live their lives. And that comes through from the census report.
Sure.
It's a change, Corin. We're undergoing a paradigmatic change as a result of digital technologies. And we've got to recognise this.
The census report that David Harvey referred to there is called Content That Crosses the Line, and it was published by the Classification Office, the agency set up long before the internet ever existed. The report surveys how young New Zealanders actually operate online, what alarms them, and what they think they need protection from. And it also said that access to social media platforms among children appears to be widespread, even though most platforms set minimum age requirements. And young people interviewed this year for that report said that taking away their devices and banning them from social media was a significant interference in the way in which they lived their lives. And
young people engage with social media and other online content for the same reasons as adults: to make and maintain social connections, access entertainment, stay informed, explore their interests and express themselves. Most young people grow up with consistent access to online content, and the use of social media is generally seen as a normal part of life.
The Content That Crosses the Line report also says young users know that their content feeds are shaped by their own activity, but that just highlighted how little control they often feel they have over what they're shown on social media because of the opaque algorithms of the platforms.
Some participants talked about how harmful or disturbing content can appear unexpectedly while scrolling through social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram or Snapchat, even when they hadn't searched for it.
Now, there's plenty more in that report that was released just last week, but entirely ignored by the media, in stark contrast to the Prime Minister's announcement this week of a members' bill that may never even be debated in Parliament, let alone become law. And if that's what happens, it'll be another episode in which an entire generation has now grown up online without any government ever taking any serious steps to get to grips with the internet. A decade and a half after Justice Minister Simon Power ordered a review into what he called at the time the Wild West online, we still have the same pre-internet era organisations regulating our media, and none that effectively marshal the internet for the good of New Zealanders, whether they're 16 years of age or not. While that idea of a social media ban for teenagers may not end up ever becoming law, something else this week which also took the country by surprise already has: pay equity claims legislation that was passed precipitously and without public consultation, or even any real warning at all. This was RNZ News last Thursday.
The Coalition has rushed through legislation under urgency, raising the threshold for workers to prove they've been poorly paid due to their gender. It will save the government billions of dollars, which would have otherwise gone to increased wages. Asked whether he is worried about women abandoning National, Mr Luxon told reporters the government is simply making the scheme more workable and sustainable.
Whether I talk to women or men, what everyone's focused on is cost of living. And what they're looking for is strong economic management in uncertain times, and that's what they're getting.
And they're also getting a fair amount of flack from commentators in the media. The sheer unfairness and making it much harder for women to show they have been unfairly treated will have a lasting impact, particularly on National, said the New Zealand Herald's Audrey Young, who's not in the habit of hyperbole. Thanks, ladies, you've balanced the budget, was the read of another veteran observer, Richard Harman, on his site Politic. And on her Substack blog, Sideswiped, Anna Samways gathered together the statements of strong support for the Equal Pay Amendment Bill in Parliament back in 2017 from people who are now senior ministers in the current cabinet. It's quite a list. And in other political news this week, TVNZ aired a scoop about another government minister handling her information by email.
These two folders contain hundreds and hundreds of pages, emails and documents, all relating to Erica Stanford's private Gmail account. Does that sound like very limited instances?
Well, again, as I said, I'm very relaxed about it.
Erica Stanford eventually admitted that this was untidy, and then other ministers also ended up owning up to that too, after the media started asking questions.
Do you send any of your emails to your Gmail account by any chance?
Look, I don't think so. To be honest, I don't send many emails at all.
Yet others in the media reckon the exposure of the story said more about the media than the ministers.
I'm increasingly embarrassed at an industry I've spent my working life in, watching it crumble as judgment, professionalism and audience understanding goes down the gurgler.
Last Wednesday, Mediawatch's Hayden Donnell looked back up the gurgler at all of that on Midweek Mediawatch, our weekly catch-up with Emile Donovan on nights here on RNZ National. If you missed it, that's on the Mediawatch podcast page at rnz.co.nz or available for free wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on Midweek Mediawatch, they also looked at further twists in the battle for control of the Herald's publisher NZME. But on Friday, peace broke out, sort of, with what looks like a compromise between the current board and the activist shareholder James Grennan, the billionaire from Canada who only became an NZME shareholder back in March. Now, he had sought the chairmanship for himself and the removal of the incumbent directors and directorships for his allies instead. And as we've heard here on Mediawatch, they also had plans to influence NZME journalism, which alarmed the current board, journalists at the Herald, and some of the other NZME shareholders. But the statement to the stock exchange on Friday confirmed that the current board chair Barbara Chapman had now agreed to step aside if former National Party MP and Government Minister Stephen Joyce was appointed to replace her, and that was a move proposed by her own husband, also an NZME shareholder. Now, Stephen Joyce, of course, had a successful career as a commercial radio entrepreneur before politics, and prior to all that going public last Friday, Stephen Joyce himself seemed pretty on side with the idea when doorstepped by Stuff.
I'm talking to shareholders, all sorts of shareholders at the moment, just to get a view of where things are at. I'm obviously aware of some of the public discussion that's been going on, and if I can perform a role where I help bring the interests of the different shareholder groups together, then obviously that would be helpful, I think.
Significantly, Joyce in charge has now also been endorsed by James Grennan himself, who's been nominated as an NZME director as well. And the compromise includes another of his demands, a new editorial board to assist and advise the editorial teams at NZME. Now, that board will include the lawyer and blogger Philip Crump, who James Grennan had initially picked to lead it. Crump has worked for NZME before as the editor of the short-lived subscription service ZB Plus that was launched in 2023, promising more views on today's news and no mealy-mouthed non-committal utterances from the best opinion writers in the country. No story would be off limits, they said, as they urged readers to join the revolution. But within a year, ZB Plus had been quietly wound down by NZME. Philip Crump has also been appointed by the current government to the board of the Waitangi Tribunal and the board of NZ On Air, which dispenses public money for content on a contestable basis to media companies, among them NZME. So interesting times ahead then, though none of this is a done deal until the NZME shareholders vote on it early next month. And it's also interesting times right now for the top brass of New Zealand Rugby, which this week announced that its revenue went up by 7% in 2024. And that was largely due to revenue from broadcasting, going up by twice as much as that in percentage terms, to more than $100 million for the year. But the 2024 financial results for New Zealand Rugby didn't sound so great on Checkpoint last Thursday.
For a third consecutive year, NZ Rugby has recorded a financial loss. At its AGM today, it was announced the game's governing body saw a nearly $20 million deficit for 2024.
So where did all that record revenue actually go? On RNZ's Checkpoint, Jonty Dine said some of it was sunk into New Zealand Rugby's own media platform.
$38 million over 4 years towards their own content platform, NZR+.
And even though New Zealand Rugby has cash in the bank in reserve, $175 million of it, Chief Executive Mark Robinson said the game's model was unsustainable. Well, earlier in the week, another multi-million-dollar figure in the news prompted News Talk ZB's Heather Duplessis-Allen to suggest pulling the pin on the game altogether.
I think we should stop rugby. What do you think? Just ban rugby? Ban it?
Well, no, carry on doing it. But it means you ban everything. You ban getting out of bed in the morning.
Well, a ban on getting out of bed may end up being more popular than a ban on rugby. But why were they talking about that in the first place? Well, because of fresh ACC statistics showing rugby injuries cost the country more than any other sport by far.
$148 million of public money.
Yes.
For ACC for rugby players.
Oish.
Big bucks then, but other than ZB's Heather Duplessis-Allen, who didn't really mean it, no one was seriously suggesting that banning rugby might help the government save millions in the upcoming budget, unlike the reversal of those pay equity deals. Anyhow, these days the problems of professional rugby go well beyond the public cost of the injuries it causes.
Isn't everybody in rugby just a bit stuffed when it comes to their finances?
I don't think so. Are they?
Yes, Piney. Honestly.
No, all the Super Rugby franchises I think are doing very well through their broadcast revenue from New Zealand Rugby, through sponsorship. I think they're doing okay.
Heather Duplessis-Allen took that as a challenge and turned to Google, triumphantly telling listeners this soon after.
Hurricanes seek $1 million injection from shareholders after $700,000 loss in 2024. That is from exactly about 1 month ago. Not only did they have a $700,000 loss in 2024, they also had a $1.4 million deficit in 2023. So that puts paid to that stupid idea of taking any games to Fiji.
And having pulled the financial rug out from under the Hurricanes, Heather Duplessis-Allen asked her Perth-based Australian news correspondent Oliver Peterson,
"Do you still watch Super Rugby?"
I will go to the game when it's in Perth, but I won't sit down and watch it.
Really?
And yeah.
Well, not even watching a Super Rugby game, even when you're in the stadium, that really isn't an endorsement. But the sponsors surely still want a piece of the glamorous All Blacks, don't they? Well, seems so, judging by this on Monday's ZB News.
New Zealand Rugby have taken another step towards filling their sponsorship gaps left by Ford and Ineos with the signing of Toyota to a 3-year deal.
Though perhaps they're not after every piece of the All Blacks, judging by this 30 minutes later.
New Zealand Rugby is still looking for a sponsor for the back of the All Blacks shorts, but have partly filled the sponsorship void left by Ineos.
And maybe that's New Zealand Rugby not wishing to rush into any bum deal just to fill the void in the back of the All Blacks shorts. But higher up in that bulletin, there was news of future worries hanging over another sport.
Still no broadcast deal for Netball New Zealand, but that isn't stopping them trumpeting a plan for next year's ANZ Premiership. The current deal with Sky, which upholds the pay model, expires this year.
And when the ANZ Premiership got underway this weekend, it was, like last year, a shortened season. And on 9 to noon last Tuesday, RNZ sports reporter Joe Porter said that itself pointed to possible money problems for top players.
Because of those fewer games, it obviously means possibly the broadcast rights deal might not be worth so much, and therefore there'll be a possible hit to some of the players' earnings. Now, because of that, the players would be forgiven, you would think, for possibly looking elsewhere for opportunities to try and earn some coin. The likes of Grace Nweke, the Silver Fern star, is playing in Australia because she wants, to further her career, to play with some of the best, and of course, it's a chance to earn a little bit more bank in the prime of your career.
This time last year, Netball New Zealand and Sky TV agreed a 1-year extension to their broadcast partnership that provides the bulk of the money to pay professional netball players, and a further 12-month deal was done with TVNZ to show Saturday games free to air as well, which continues this year.
The ANZ Premiership, every Saturday live and free on TVNZ Plus and 2.
Last Wednesday, TVNZ put out an upbeat statement about former Silver Fern and current breakfast host Jenny May Clarkson being pumped to return to her netball roots for the season's TV coverage. And just last week, NZME, owner of the Herald and News Talk ZB, announced what it called an exclusive multi-year media partnership with Netball New Zealand, including the ANZ Premiership and Silver Ferns. Netball New Zealand's chief executive Jenny Wiley said this week that netball now has more than 145,000 registered players and is the highest participation sport in our secondary schools, with increasing participation also from men. And that all sounds good and healthy. And in July last year, RNZ's Bridget Tunnicliffe reported that 750,000 New Zealanders had tuned in to TVNZ's weekly free-to-air ANZ Premiership games, with a quarter of the season still to go at that point. And Netball New Zealand's annual report said that 1 million viewers had watched the competition on Sky Sport the previous year, and it was tracking towards the best year for viewers for a long time. Excitement as we head towards 2025 was Netball New Zealand's message. But as we heard earlier, the 2025 season begins this weekend with no broadcast deal in the bag for another season, short or long, and there are worries about the best players here now going to Australia. A decade ago, their teams and ours played each other in a genuine high-quality Trans-Tasman League, so I asked Bridget Tunnicliffe of RNZ this week if netball was now at risk, depending on broadcasters that might not come to the party.
Every Saturday game now is being broadcast live and exclusively on TVNZ. TVNZ are producing the Saturday games, and then Sky is then taking that on a delay, and then Sky is, as normal, producing the other two remaining games. This started last year with TVNZ and Netball New Zealand self-producing those Saturday matches. So that means that Netball New Zealand has a bit more input into how they actually want the broadcast to look and feel.
Does that actually help them break the reliance on Sky that a lot of professional sports have had in the past, if they're doing their own production, so they could go another way for the future?
Yeah, I guess it's an experiment, and there have been calls just generally to get more netball back on free-to-air TV like it used to back in the 90s and early 2000s, just to get more eyeballs on the sport. Sport New Zealand actually came to the party to assist Netball New Zealand with this weekly free-to-air broadcast. Chief Executive Raelene Castle said last year, the deal was part of a wider strategy to help get more free-to-air coverage on women's sport. You know, it's so expensive to produce. So it'll be a trial, I guess, and interesting to see how it works. And as you know, in the background, Netball New Zealand is actually in the process of negotiating a new broadcast deal from 2026. So there's a lot of things up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds really not ideal. If we heard in the news bulletins, no broadcast partner beyond this season.
Last year, after several months of negotiations, Sky and Netball New Zealand agreed to a one-year extension to their existing broadcast deal, so that takes care of this year. And RNZ reported that the national body actually took quite a hit to its broadcast revenue, signing a significantly reduced deal with Sky TV for this season. And there is concern that whatever they are able to negotiate this year for next year and beyond, will it be able to sustain the competition as it is now? I mean, it basically covers the salary caps of the 6 franchises. The major issue facing netball right now, there is more choice out there in terms of women's sports. Sky TV show a lot more women's rugby. They show women's cricket, basketball. So netball is not the jewel in the crown. It used to be, you know, Irene van Dijk was the household name. Now it's, you know, Portia Woodman, Ruby Tui, Amelia Kerr, along with netballers. So netball is having to work a lot harder. I wouldn't be surprised if whatever agreement they come to with Sky or TVNZ or a mix, I wouldn't be surprised if that is just for 1 year and that they start again from 2027. When you think about rugby, right, it's really, really important for Sky TV to win the rugby rights. It's huge for them, right? New Zealand Rugby can almost use that as a bargaining chip to guarantee that they're also going to show their women's rugby. You must broadcast X amount of games of our women's sport. And Sky will have to agree to it because they want the All Blacks and they want Super Rugby.
And last year, you wrote about the viewing figures for netball under that new arrangement whereby there was free-to-air matches on Saturdays and Sky's coverage of the rest of the tournament. And Netball New Zealand, in their annual report, your story noted, on track to be the best ever. They were really happy. I mean, if that's correct, then it shouldn't be difficult. It should be quite an attractive thing for a broadcaster to put it on. But are we seeing now maybe it's becoming more of a sort of buyer's market for the broadcasters? And of course, they don't have that many alternatives to go to in the New Zealand market.
Yeah, more competition with other sports. And Jenny Wiley, the CEO of Netball New Zealand, has conceded that it is a more difficult market right now. Generally, economically, it's really difficult. If this experiment with TVNZ works, maybe it's a cheaper alternative to the reliance on Sky TV. But I can't imagine Sky TV not being involved at all with netball. I would be very surprised if that were to happen.
Would they be happier if there was a return to, as some people seem to be suggesting, to some sort of Trans-Tasman League coming back again? Because, before COVID, we used to have, the Sydney Swans or whatever would come over as a genuine high-quality Trans-Tasman League, which I guess it hasn't been.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who just feel like the ANZ Premiership has become stale, and they've introduced a couple of rule changes this year to spark it up, a 2-point shot. But I don't...
Yeah, those are generally signs of a sport that's a bit in trouble if they're trying to make it more exciting at the end.
Yeah, it's something. But for me, it's we don't have enough import players coming here, and they add a lot of interest. Like the best import players in the world now are going to the Australian League because you're able to pay them more. There's this prestige with playing in the Australian League because it is. There's no doubt that it is the strongest league in the world. It won't be a Trans-Tasman League like it used to be. That was 5 teams New Zealand, 5 teams Australia. It was an equal partnership. The best that New Zealand could hope for would be Netball Australia want to expand that league. It won't happen next year. 2027 would be the earliest. Yeah, there's just a feeling that the ANZ Premiership is becoming stale and you're just seeing the same players play each other.
Yeah, last year there was some surprise in broadcast circles when Sky announced they were prepared to let some of their games go free-to-air on Sky Open, free-to-air channel, Friday night league and Saturday rugby, Super Rugby. Is that mix of most of it on pay TV, obviously, to keep their subscribers going, but letting some go to free-to-air to boost the viewership, is that kind of working in principle?
Yeah, I guess you've got to wonder why Sky is doing that, because they're potentially missing out on subscribers, right? Maybe they're hoping that people will think, I do need to subscribe to Sky because I love this one game a week, but I don't want to miss out on the other 2. And I guess it makes Sky TV look good. Mm-hmm. It makes them look like they're making these games available for people. When I grew up in the 80s, 90s, me and my friends knew the names of every player in the Silver Ferns. Now, even with my nieces who do play netball, they don't necessarily know.
Coaches were national figures too, right?
Yeah. There doesn't seem to be the same sort of, hero worshipping or just the knowledge of exactly who the Silver Ferns are.
Is that possibly a consequence of corralling the top level of a sport onto pay TV?
Yeah.
So if it does get bigger exposure on a free-to-air, that kind of helps?
Yeah. That's the concern, is that by forcing people to have to pay for it, then a lot of people are actually just missing out on being exposed to it. There are more female sports role models out there now too, with the rugby and the cricketers as well.
In the statement that NZME put out this week announcing a kind of content partnership, they're going to get the Hits radio station involved with promotion. Netball New Zealand said in that statement 145,000 registered players, which is a lot, and also the most participated in sport in high schools. I suppose the problem you've got if you're a broadcaster or marketer, thinking, kids in high school, not so much of a market, right? So these things all come into play, don't they, when it's the hard-nosed world of trying to get professional sport up and absolutely requiring the exposure and the income from broadcasting.
The participation rates are great. They've always been really good, and they haven't really been dropping off. So I've never really understood, why does that not translate? In theory,
it's attractive to marketers and broadcasters.
Yeah,
right?
And they say, the mother in the family is the one that spends a lot of the money on domestic products, and so netball should be really attractive to all those kind of retailers, right? Because they are the domestic spenders in the family, and so I've never really understood why netball struggles to get sponsors, and why hundreds of thousands of people aren't watching netball every weekend. I've played with netballers who have been netballers for 20, 30 years and they love the sport. And I'll say to them, did you watch the Silver Ferns last night? Or did you see the grand final of the ANZ Premiership the other week? And some of them are just like, no.
So even the biggest games in the most elite
there
competitions.
are some netballers who love the game but don't necessarily tune in. And when you listen to, talkback radio, sports chat and stuff, still 95% of the callers are calling in about rugby and their men. For women, maybe some are just more interested in playing and are not so bothered about what's happening with the national team. I don't know what it is.
Even if they're successful in beating Australia and all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so best guess, just to finish, is this situation likely to persist where they can't nail down a broadcast deal? Or do you think it is just a bit of negotiation, even though it's been going on a long time? It's not necessarily a sign there might be problems getting a lucrative enough deal for the following year to make sure we still have a top-level A-League professional competition?
The hope is that the broadcast deal could be nailed down in the next couple of months so that players can sign on for teams next year and know what the heck is going on. I suspect it'll just be for 1 year to buy themselves time for 2027 to look at trying to get some teams into the Australian League. We reported last year that it was nearly half the broadcast revenue from the Sky deal for this year than it had been. How could they possibly sustain those salaries if that's the same?
But that could be happening in other sports too. General downturn.
Yeah.
RNZ sports journalist and netball expert Bridget Tunnicliffe. That's it for this weekend. Thanks to Hayden Donnell for producing and Todd Zahner for bringing the words to life with his expert voiceovers. Thanks to you for listening, of course, and we'll be back again next week. If you've got any thoughts for us in the meantime or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Send us an email, mediawatch@rnz.co.nz, or you'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X. And you can even write us a letter and send it to Mediawatch, PO Box 123, Wellington. I'll be back next Wednesday with Midweek Media Watch. Catch you then. In the meantime, follow Media Watch and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.